Welcome to MOBE Mondays.
Good evening. My name is Yvette Moyo, and I am happy to welcome you to this segment of MOBE. These are normally MOBE Mondays, but we have been going all week long because this is Women's History Month. And our topic is women in advertising. And I'm excited. This is my field. And who would be here on a Friday night? And our topic is women in advertising. What's going on? And I'm excited. This is my field. And who would be here on a Friday night? Somebody is mocking me. Somebody is mocking me. Sounds like that stopped. And I don't know what that was, but it's really about Friday night surprises. Oh wow. That stopped. I'm gonna get off, and Ericka. It's really about Friday night surprises.
I think someone said that someone might have on their Facebook page, and if they do, they just need to mute that. So Yvette always gives us a wonderful hello, and so she will come back in on the backside and always gives us a wonderful hello. So she will come back in. Yep, that's you, Yvette. So for those of you all who are a part of this virtual world, yes, this is something that happens quite a bit. But I'm very excited this evening, and thank you all for joining us on a Friday. For those of you all who have stayed the course, this has been a phenomenal week. We have been able to get into the minds of women who, in spite of all of the barriers and challenges, have constantly made a life for themselves because of their brilliance and their excellence and their fortitude and tenacity. And tonight is no less than that. Tonight, joining me, I have Deidre Smalls-Landau, and I have Robin Jackson. And we're really going to be talking about how 2020 has really put us all for somewhat of an unexpected turn. What started off, as most of you all know, was a very bright year for everything. And then the global pandemic, severe economic recession, and racial reckoning, and the protest resulted in consumer spending coming to a halt. And we know why, because people were, making sure that they were saving for any uncertainties. In addition, brands and consumers started to demand that brands stand for a purpose, stand against racism, and all other injustices. What we're seeing now is really that demand is affecting the way advertising, marketing, and PR messages are resonating with the consumer. And tonight we're going to talk to these two young women about, in their position, what it is they see, how this effect is impacting the industry in which they are leaders in, and how are we able to provide the solutions, not only for our company, but also from the DE&I perspective. How are we able to better service and provide a generation that's going to come up from behind and be able to assume some of what we are seeing? I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves, and not because I'm being rude, but because I cannot find my bio that I have so eloquently and so painstakingly put together for the both of you all. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, and then hopefully by that time I would have found what I'm looking for.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so I can start, Robin, if you'd like.
Sure.
So my name is Deidre Smalls-Landau, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer and EVP of Global Culture at UM. is an agency, a media agency within IPG. Media Brands is the holding company for the media agency. We are within Media Brands. There are several agencies, and I also, if you had eloquently put together the bio, I'm not going to try to big myself up. I'm just going to talk about what I do. And just, at the height of the pandemic, with all the injustices going on, I eloquently or very firmly raised my hand and said I would be the co-chair of the internal Media Brands Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. Again, Media Brands has about 8 agencies within it. And so when everything hit, I said, we need to do something specifically as it relates to the injustices. We need to do something. And here's a plan. This is what we're going to do. And let's just make it happen. So in addition to being the US CMO and the EVP of Global Culture, I then raised my hand because I could no longer stay silent.
Well, you know what? That's why bios come in handy because you're very humble. And I have found that bio. So I get to humble brag now about you. Okay. Because you are an award-winning advertising executive who has been the forefront of the industry for more than 20 years. You serve as a U.S. Chief Marketing Officer and Global Head of Culture for overseeing its internal and external branding, platforms, initiatives, and global research to help shape the agency that clients want to work with and people want to work for. In her role, Deidre ensures that underrepresented segments of the population are at the core of the agency's business and branding, and works with client teams to integrate multicultural data and insights into UM's planning process. I'd like to also continue because, when you've done this much work, it deserves this much. It deserves for me to share. In your previous roles as UM's first ever Global Chief Cross-Cultural Officer, you established UM's Diversity and Belonging Council and led UM's most ambitious diversity recruitment effort, Unity 2040. I'd love to know more about that, which aims to create a U.S. employee population that matches the diversity of the 2040 U.S. population. That's smart. She also spearheaded culturally focused initiatives that informed UM's work and decision-making on a global scale. Deidre fundamentally believes that diversity and inclusion for all is a true competitive advantage that drives UM's business success. And to that end, she is hyper-focused on ensuring that the agency's offering captures the intersection of all cultures. She is the co-chair of the Media Brands Cross-Agency Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. And she's also 2018 Adweek Media All-Star and recipient of the She Runs It Working Mother of the Year in 2018 and 2020. She served as a judge on the 2018 Cannes Glass Lion, as well as the 2018 Festival of Media Global Awards. She's a board member of the 4A's Agency Council and the 4A's Media Leadership Council, where she advises the industry's leading trade organization on policy, programming, and best practices. I'd also like to add that she's also become, the icon for the Ad Club of New York. And if that weren't enough, that was awarded to you, I would say, probably the second week of February. And if you look on LinkedIn now, it is still ongoing. And people who have worked with you, Deidre, giving you so many accolades. So to me, that's a testimony. You received your Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration and Marketing from Utica College, and you currently live in Brooklyn with your husband, Jonathan, and twin girls, Nyla and Soleil. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
That is wonderful. And now I'm going to find yours, Robin. And I would like to really thank Robin for showing up tonight, because Robin, as often might happen when you're doing events, things change. And we had someone who had to bow out gracefully, and she at the last minute said yes. And I am so forever thankful for that. So let's see here. Robin, I have it. Robin. I know you sent it and I have it. Oh, Pat, help me. I know you're somewhere. Help me out, Pat. Everyone should have a Pat. Let me tell you.
I will help you out if that helps a bit.
Yeah, do what I did.
Yeah. So first, I'm sorry about my dog in the back. There's just nothing I can do at this point. If you hear it, I
don't even hear him.
Oh, great, because it is really distracting for me. Okay, awesome. So thank you guys so much for having me. I'm not sure I should have gone after Deidre, but okay. Well, that was a choice. All right. I'm game for it. So I am in the marketing sphere. I'm more of a public relations person. And, as you guys know, it's all sort of mixed up and integrated, and I kind of touch everything. I've been agency side most of my career. I spent time at IPG, I spent time at Omnicom, and most recently I went out on my own and stood up my own agency, and have been working hard to kind of really plant roots and build out something that was different, that really reflected my voice and reflected the voice that isn't impacted by all of the things that sort of I learned and saw as an agency leader and practice leader, et cetera, et cetera. So super, super excited to be here. I've worked across brands, I've worked across industries, mostly embedded in corporate and health and consumer, and touching across entertainment and lifestyle. But from a DEI perspective, 2020 has been such a whirlwind that it's a little bit like I'm still trying to process all that has happened and all that we need to kind of activate against. Now that there are more attention. This dog, she wants to make an appearance.
Let us see, because I want to know what's doing that little growling. That's interesting.
Yeah, I hear it now.
Yeah.
She's 17 pounds, guys. I told you, like, is
that a French bulldog?
And she's a Shih Tzu. So same sort of, I forget the term, but the short snout. Yeah, that's what happens. The short snout dog, and this is the result. So profound apologies. It's actually better that she's sleeping, kinda.
Oh, she's sleeping. I thought she was.
No, she's snoring.
Okay, well, let me then read this, because I'm getting this, Robin, that's hilarious. I'm getting this from your LinkedIn, and then I'm going to go over some of the things that you've done. Sure. You're offering more than 20 years of public relations and communications experience with a focus on brand and corporate communications, celebrity strategies, stakeholder relationship building, and integrated marketing communications campaigns. You are a creative, intuitive, and independent thinker who understands how to build internal and external advocacy to deliver results. And we're going to put the good juju out for you, because we know you can do that. Skilled at both and the do, with the know-how to motivate teams that deliver value to the bottom line, adept at navigating diverse environments ranging from small organizations to highly matrixed multinational companies, and turning insights into action. You are now the founder and principal of your own communications company, RJ Communications. You were the EVP, head of U.S. Health and Wellness at Citizen Relations. Citizen Relations is the name of the company. Excuse me. Yep. The executive vice president, head of New York Healthcare at Zeno Group, and senior vice president at the RX Mosaic Health. So let me tell you something. The receipts on both of you all are absolutely impressive and amazing. And so I'm happy that I was able to kind of brag for you, because we never brag enough for ourselves. Sure. Tonight, we talked about it, right? So let's just jump into it. One of the, when we had to do this pivot, the show was about CMOs and what does their, return on investment look like during this time. And so, as the real world, and I think this is a great real world problem that CMOs and those of us in corporate America have, is what happens when you have to pivot and change. how can you adapt and be flexible to the moment? And so what we have tonight is not only do we have our CMO perspective, but we're also going to have the PR perspective. One of the key elements in developing a successful brand is connecting your product or service with a moving story. When you tell a story that people can relate to, they experience a powerful emotional connection, and it encourages them to choose your company over your brand's company. So I'm going to hop around, but I'm going to do this backwards because I'd like to know when you hear that, because there is this notion that PR and marketing are very separate. I'd love for you all to really kind of break that down a little bit, because I think that there's two stories that are being told. One from the marketer's perspective that the brand has to hear from, and one from the PR perspective. So if you would, could you please share with me? Even though I put that on hold. Deidre, if we can start with you.
Sure.
Yeah, give me a little bit of what does it mean to be a marketer?
So I think the first thing is, do you want to know what it means to be a marketer now, or the difference between marketing and PR and how they live together?
So I'd like both. So let's do what that looks like traditionally, and now with COVID having come and disrupted, what it kind of looks like to you today.
Yeah, so I think what it looked like traditionally, and I think it's been discussed and written about multiple times across many different trade journals, many different CMO journals and industry papers. The role of marketing was traditionally just focused on brand, right? Sort of how does the brand show up? It has evolved given the advent of technology, given the need for more purpose, and diversity. So those three things: technology, purpose, and diversity. All of them are interwoven. Technology is huge, right? But I think those three things, and the last two as of late, right? Or even the diversity has been more significant as of last year. Was always creeping up in there, right? And as long as I've been in the industry, it's always been, when I remember when Ebony was Ebony and sitting in a room and discussing with, the publisher, sort of the need for FCB to do more advertising with the Black audience, so it's just like, it's been a conversation that we've been having for a really long time. But I think this, the reckoning was a wrecking ball for some, right? It just knocked in your house. It's just like there was a huge wrecking ball that went through your house and said, wake the F up. Like, this is no joke. We cannot do this. It had brands changing the names of their products. I mean, things that we've been living with forever and we've accepted. And we were like, oh, okay, so Uncle Ben's, Aunt Jemima, Mrs. Butterworth, Washington Redskins. It's okay, like, it's all fine. And it's this great awakening. So I'm going around, but really bringing it back to the role of a marketer. The chief marketing officer is all of those things, and they're all connected. The data implosion, that is literally, as we talk about data privacy, as we talk about a cookieless world. I mean, all of those things are impacting how consumers find brands. But the purpose and the diversity are how consumers find your company, right? How they connect to your company. And those things are just as important. So this little ecosystem is important because people want to work for companies. There's a generation that's growing up that people want to work for companies that have a soul, that have purpose, that have integrity, that mean something. And they're looking for that. They're looking to make an impact. So a marketer's responsibility is now so much more. right? It's technology, it's as I mentioned, purpose, it's diversity, and it is sort of connecting all those things together.
Yeah, that's a great segue because Robin, what I understand, what Deidre is saying is now this consumer is demanding so much more. And we are talking to the consumer in such a way, the field is so competitive. There's this misconception about PR that it doesn't have much impact as it relates to that. What do you say, and how do you really kind of show up as that PR? Do you align yourself with the marketing? And so let's talk a little bit, let's delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, to be honest, to separate PR from marketing is your first mistake, to be honest. They are, while not the same, they absolutely are. Not you, Ericka, obviously, but like the first mistake, right? The idea that PR is not marketing or that one doesn't drive or impact the other is the first mistake. It just isn't. It isn't what's going to get you what you need to where you want to be. PR is a part of the marketing mix. It is just another lever to pull, and using different gatekeepers, et cetera, and different principles. But truly, PR is just a different way to tell a story. And it has to connect to your marketing. It has to connect to your brand objectives, has to connect to your business objectives, or you failed, quite frankly.
Right.
So the discipline is different, and the tactics are different, and the way you communicate the messages and the way that you tell the story is different, but it all ladders up to the same thing. And if it's not, then you're not doing it right. And so it's so interesting because PR is often thought of as so siloed and so different, and I understand why, I really do. But I make it really clear that it isn't different, and it shouldn't be different. And obviously the KPIs look different and all of those things, but PR is just another way to tell the brand story, and to build advocacy for the brand story in a way that is authentic. In ways that, quite frankly, advertising simply can't. And so I always have this conversation with clients and with big company CMOs who kind of get it in theory, but don't really get it. PR has always been treated a little bit as the marketing stepchild, because it's not what there isn't necessarily a direct line between PR and the bottom line.
Let me
And
ask
so,
you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But I think they are connected. Sorry,
Yeah,
I just want to say, I mean, what I do, I mean, I work hand in hand with the PR team, hand in hand.
That's the right way to do it.
We talk about what needs to, as trying to reflect the agency and get people to join the agency, sort of what sort of causes we need to be committed to.
Sure.
Like what sort of, how does our owned and operated sort of channels really drive interest? So it is connected. I'm just giving you that from, and I've never seen it as separate or thought about it as separate.
Yeah. I'm actually happy that you've mentioned it in that regard, because my question was going to be, is PR and marketing aligned differently to tell the story or to connect the consumer or the different demographics, right? And the reason why I asked that, it seemed like when I was studying the history of consumerism, Black consumerism, PR was always a stronger agency, where a PR agency was typically thought of as doing not only the work of a traditional PR, but they also did a lot of community building. They also did advertising, and all these other things. So am I getting the understanding that that's how the integrated marketing process that has worked for Black advertising, or Black, the way in which to, gather and grab Black consumers, is that any different than general market? Are we using PR more in
That's a really good question. I don't know if I would say we use it more. I would say that there's a more reflexive and almost immediate response in multicultural communities to PR, right? Because PR is really about conversation. And so if you think about Black Twitter as an example, yet you're getting sort of the immediate feedback. So I don't know that if I'm like, if I got a scoreboard, I'm saying it's used more. I'm saying that what you see is more of the conversation in certain multicultural communities and among multicultural audiences. And so when you get that immediate feedback, then oftentimes companies double down. They're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I see that there's this kind of reflexive or almost immediate engagement. And so, all right, so I'm going to do more of this, or I'm going to heavy up on this. So, I say to companies and CMOs, you want the conversation almost irrespective of where it lands.
Okay.
You want it. It stings sometimes in the moment, and it stings sometimes in the short term, but the long-term impact is really what you want, especially now to the point you made earlier, Ericka, where consumers are expecting so much more of our brands. Like there's almost a checklist of what of the kinds of companies and brands that we're going to get behind. And so you want to hear all of it. And that's really where PR can level up and get you a little bit more of the, that fast feedback, if you will. It's not necessarily the goal, but that often is the end result. And we see a lot of that more so with, in my experience, with multicultural communities and targets.
And we have to, just to pile on there, and again, this is how they both live together. If we think about the multicultural community, PR has always been a part of our life, right? So word of mouth is PR, right? Mm-hmm. So we've always been, I always say there was a offline community before there was an online community, right? So the Black Twitter, for sure, it was already there. We just didn't have a way of spreading it in a way that would have the volumes that it has because it's global, or it's crossing states. It's crossing. Now we have sort of there are no state lines. There are no seas, so to speak, right? So when we think about that's why for the multicultural audience or cultural groups, it's always been such a core aspect of who we are, who we trust. We trust, our neighbors. We trust the people in our community. It's all tied to trust, right?
Absolutely.
And if you always feel like you have been, and we have plopped here, right? Extracted from our motherland and plopped here, then we've been building our network, right off the slate. Just like, okay,
as a means of survival, even, right?
As a means of survival, like the rhythms, the dances, the Geechee Gullah language, that was all a part of PR, passing them. So it's just such a core part of who we are as people, which is why it's so important to us. Like if you hear what's happening right now with the COVID vaccine, and you hear that despite all the things that we heard last year where vaccines were going to be prioritized for underrepresented minority communities, and then you hear these stories where the communities are not getting it, who are they pulling in to help support that? The churches, which is about community, which is about PR, which is about, so it's all connected. It's a huge, so I'm sorry to go on and steal your thunder, Robin.
Please, because I want to know how then, Deidre, because you've been general market, knowing what you know, how has that been an advantage or has it been a disadvantage recognizing how one group, really responds and really kind of tells you who they are and what they like as a consumer, and yet being in the inside and maybe people not listening to that?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that sort of it is a secret weapon, right? To be able to distill in a very clear way, like this is the difference in this culture on a myriad of issues or challenges. There's always distilling it down. And so it is somewhat of a secret weapon, but it is also when you marry sort of those insights, and you think about if you don't understand the audience's influence and affluence in the right way, it could be relegated as less important, right? And just sort of living in that little silo of we're only talking to Black people, or we're only talking to Latino people, when we know that the Black and Latino culture or an Asian culture are influential, right? We know that we know that millennials, you can't say millennial without saying multicultural. You definitely can't say Gen Z without saying they are multicultural, right? So it's just like you can't separate them. And I think what's happened over time is sometimes they do get decoupled because there's this fallacy that might exist on the importance of one versus the other. And so you stand in a constant state of reminding and education. I always joke and say, like, just like with the old school reach and frequency curve, right? 3 plus reach. And then if the consumer sees the ad 3 times and they're going to be convinced, that's what it's like with everything else. It's just sort of like repeat, rinse and repeat. Like, let's repeat that again. It's a different decade, but it's still the same conversation, quite honestly.
Sure.
And can I jump in really quickly, just to add to that, it still astounds me, and I'm not exactly sure why it does. I probably need to unpack that, but it still astounds me that the idea, like, I don't think that companies and brands have truly, really understood the influence, to Deidre's point, of some of these communities. Like, the idea that I am putting forth a strategy that really puts this community first, this Black community first, this Latinx community first, means that I'm not reaching your core audience. Like, there's still such a disconnect between that idea that I am, this is going to be our forward market, if you will, because that influence trickles down to your broader market. The times that I've had to, in the last week and a half, have these sort of like, go through the 101 book and really kind of talk about the influence of these communities and how it impacts your brand from a credibility perspective, from an authenticity perspective, especially if you're trying to reach Gen Z, still boggles. So I just had to add that because Deidre said something that kind of triggered for me. Like, it's still something that I don't think many CMOs are connecting the dots on, and it's still kind of a conversation that I find myself still having.
Right. And you know what? That's great, because there's a question from the audience that really, I think, kind of actually one of my questions, because I think for so long, PR was, in to a certain degree, marketing prior to, I'd say, the 2000, a lot of it was based off of a hunch or a sense of, people being influencers, being in the market, kind of giving you feedback. And now we have programmatic, we have all this information, and then there's all of these reports and all of these ways in which we measure our effect. PR didn't really have that. And I'm understanding now that you all also too are measuring your effectiveness and providing that ROI report as well. So here's the question. How do you quantify PR? And wasn't PR weighted as having more value? What do your wrap-up reports on a campaign say?
This is sort of the quintessential PR question. So let me just start by saying it used to be that the way that we measured PR was through the lens of advertising. So we would take something that, we got some coverage or some story in fill in the blank publication, right? We got it in, I don't know, Vogue, whatever. And then we would put an ad value based on column inches to that coverage. And inevitably, we would come out winners, right? Because of the cost of that space for advertising. That was a way to kind of fit PR into the square peg of advertising value in dollars. But that was what we had. That's what we leaned into at that point. I think what's happened is that there's more of an understanding of the value of PR is not necessarily about eyeballs. It's about credibility and authenticity and conversation. And that is something that's very, very difficult to measure. And so if you're starting from a place, and this is, honest to goodness, if you're starting from a place where you are comparing PR to advertising strictly in terms of metrics, you're never going to truly get it. You are actually devaluing what PR is as a discipline and the impact it has on brands and companies and reputations. And so I've said this many times. I had a client years ago. I'll never forget this, because we were managing to the then CMO, and I had my client, and she and I were trying to crack the code on how we would get the CMO to really buy into this really, really smart campaign. And I suggested that we do, pre and post awareness. Like, that seems like it's a thing that CMOs can understand. And she stopped me and she said, no. She said, because you're never going to win. You are never going to have the mass and volume that advertising does. That's not what PR is designed to do. So if I do pre and post and I measure it against what the AOR did, I'm never going to win. They're going to say, well, I'm going to take this PR budget and I'm going to double down on advertising. Not realizing that trying to match up those metrics really undersells what PR brings to the table. So all of that to say, quantifying PR is not about, it can't be about things like sales and awareness. That's not what you actually are trying too hard to make it into a numbers game. There are numbers, but they are PR specific, and you have to actually value what those metrics are in order to truly quantify PR. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And you know what, I'm going to ask Deidre somewhat of the same, because I would think that right now with COVID, the CMO role has really, and you talked a little bit about it, has really changed significantly, or maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. I'd love to hear how, if it has changed, what does that look like in terms of how you quantify, where your spend, the budgets and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah. So I think again, if I go back to what we talked about, the evolution of the CMO community, or I think I said purpose and diversity and marketing or technology. I think with COVID, I think it accelerated a lot of things. It definitely accelerated e-commerce, I think, for like 15 years, right? Because we couldn't go anywhere. We had to shop. Brands that were available. Brands that were not. And so actually it's interesting because you couldn't really do anything about it, right? If there wasn't a brand that was in the store or when you ordered online, you just couldn't do anything about it. So branding is important, right? Because you want that consumer to come back after. But I think with COVID, I think the idea of purpose, I think that's the biggest thing that has changed, that made brands feel, and social injustice. made brands feel like that they needed to reevaluate sort of their ability to be accomplices in these chains that have held Black culture down for so long, or if you want to say BIPOC, down for so long. So I think it accelerated the interest and the commitment. Now I hope it stays. Yeah. That is my goal and my wish, that because I've never seen this before. I've never seen so many people care, so many people feeling like they want to have their knees on the necks of corporate America that are not Black, that are white allies, Asian, LGBTQ, Latino, Latinx. So I think what has changed is it's CMOs feeling like they have been accomplices in sort of the biases that have existed in the system. But it also, I think, has forced CMOs to think wide and deep about the solutions around social inequities, right? So as a CMO, what I'm thinking about at my agency is, I was talking about diversity, and you mentioned the 2040 goal. I, thought about that in 2018 and said, we need to have more diversity in this agency. Why don't we have more diversity? We need a target, we need metrics, and we need a big, scary, hairy goal. Unity 2040. Get to the population size of the multicultural audience, what that will be represented in 2040 by 2020. We did that before anything. So we were trying to get to 13%, and then COVID hit, and then in for 13 and all these other pledges happened. So I think back to the questions of what I sort of started to care for was, okay, we can do the talent, but we've always been doing that. We just have to add equity into that. But we also need to think about our business, what we do, how we can be more accountable, what our product is, and how we can support the community in a big way. So we did a lot of different things. We created the media responsibility principles, which is holding social platforms accountable, hate speech, protect people, promote respect, misinformation, disinformation, diverse and represent. So we audit now. So 10 principles, those were just some of them. We created a checklist. It got adopted by the 4 A's. And then we're also sort of using that to audit digital properties and social properties all the time. So we did that. We did the equity upfront because we said we need to do something that supports Black owned first, and then we'll do Latino owned, and they all the diverse audiences are important. But we needed to do something. We can't just sit and not be great. This is being an amazing and great partner to our clients. How can we be amazing partners to our client? Thinking about what purpose means with respect to profit.
Yeah.
So our ROI that we try to deliver for our clients, because we're still in the service business, is to be great partners in that respect on this journey, and others, from the media responsibility principles to working with our digital partners to create with the MOBE to create ad tech cares, where digital properties donated their digital space during COVID to help with the disinformation and redirect misinformation to the CDC and the WHO, and we did that for Black Lives Matter as well. And we're doing it for the vaccine. So we sort of put ourselves in the center to raise the bar and the level of standard for others. As clients are thinking about the partnership that their agency can provide, it's talking to them about what's happening in the market, but it's also sort of supporting it within the respective purpose.
Deidre, that brings me to and I'm going to get back, Robin, because I feel you on that. CMOs really, you guys do have the biggest purses. You all have the pocketbooks. When we're out here, organizations that are out here trying to do things in the community, and we're looking for sponsorships and things of that nature, we're always looking to ask the CMO. And I think now with so much this racial reckoning and people demanding that brands show up in a different way and that companies show up in a different way, has there been a conversation? Because I think what you're saying with 2040, is it 2040? I'm sorry, I got that wrong.
Unity 2040, yeah.
Unity 2040. That really helps internally, of course. It helps your company, it helps your brands. How are we thinking about how are we helping the community? Are we putting monies aside with these companies to help support organizations that are out here helping to educate our communities about vaccinations and all the other desperate types of understandings our community seems to be experiencing as a result, that we can see now because of COVID, that there is like this real true, what would be the word? We lag
Equity,
behind. Yes, that equity. We lag behind in all of those particular areas and verticals. So is that something that a CMO is actually able to do and think about?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, I think that's within, again, if it goes back to what has changed, what's the evolution been, it is about community. It is about, you would not have had sort of, this was the biggest, the pandemic, I call them the two pandemics. And we would not have had the social pandemic, the racial pandemic if we wouldn't have the COVID pandemic if we didn't have the racial pandemic that has been with us forever. But I think that clients are, of course they care about this. This is, what I was getting to is, companies and changing their manufacturing line, right, to support sort of the pandemic and making N95s, because they had to do something. Mm-hmm. So what has changed? I think companies do care about it. So, but I believe that there always needs to be a consistency in the care. Care doesn't happen just in the month of February. It doesn't happen just May through December and then come back in February and then disappear into maybe Music Month or anything else. It just has to be consistent. So I think the CMOs do believe. I know I do believe. I can't speak for all CMOs, but from what I'm hearing, I do feel like there's. I'm a member of the ANA AIM board, but AIM, and all the CMOs talk about like how this is going to be different, what they're doing. You hear Mark Pritchard talking about, we are not diverse. They do great work, they do the talk, they do the look, they do all of these great campaigns, but everyone recognizes their shortcomings. So I think there's a reflection that's happening. Yeah. And I think I just wanted to be consistent, but I think CMOs care, to answer your question.
So I'm going to ask on behalf of our MOBE audience, because so many of our audience members are entrepreneurs. They are purpose-driven leaders of nonprofits. What's the best time to actually present your sponsorship package to CMOs? I think that's important. If we take nothing away today, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, where are we with that?
Well, I think right now, right, everyone's talking about the roaring 20s, right? We're going to come back and it's going to be feast and famine. Everyone's going to be running through the streets and it's going to be crazy. I think that's particularly something that might happen with the millennials. I don't know if, Gen X is going to sort of be running in the streets as much, especially. I think we're going to be like, we got to be a little careful. Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I think so it depends. I guess, the question is, I would have said, budgets should be submitted. People should start putting together their proposals and everything to approach CMOs in October, October of the prior year.
Okay.
Right? This is what we have going on, and then rinse and repeat and keep knocking on those doors thereafter. But I think now that we know, sponsorships and things like that have to be attuned to what's going on, obviously, in the marketplace. So you have to be able to pivot a little, right? The sponsorship that might have worked, that would have been in the can last year, is probably not as relevant now, right? It's like there's a different sort of vibe, a different sort of feeling. People want to have experiences, right? We're going to come out of COVID. People do want to have experiences. But what are those experiences that they want to have, right? There's a different level of luxury that's taking place. Luxury is now just actually being outside and not wearing a mask. So, is there going to be a mad dash to buy a whole bunch of luxury items versus have a luxury experience? Traveling. People are just going to want to get away, So I think sponsorship has to be tied to answer your question, it depends on culture and what's happening in culture.
Yeah, I think that's a great response, and thank you for that. Robin, I'm going to come back to you. We're at 7:51. Can you believe that?
I can't.
So I can't. It's been a long week, but listen, here's what I want to know too. My major was marketing, and I had a lot of friends who majored in marketing. Very few of us have become CMOs. That pathway to CMO was very elusive to us. And so I'm very proud that you have been able to navigate that. And I think that's a whole show in itself. Robin, for you, my question would be, because I'm going to come back, think about that a little bit, Deidre, because Robin, same thing, PR. I think so often people feel like, oh, I can do PR. Have you noticed that? There's a proliferation now, people who think they're publicists. Everyone's a publicist. And so I want to get a little bit of a snippet of kind of how you started, like from, how did you get to where you are? Was it the help? How did you see it differently? How were you smart enough to be able to end up being a founder and your own business owner? And Deidre, how did you get to the CMO? So Robin, I'm going to go with you first.
Sure. I'd love to say it was because I was smarter. Like I don't ever think that I'm smarter than other folks, because I just don't think that that's necessarily true, right? I kind of fell into PR. I started out wanting to be a journalist, and I'll skip that part of the story. But I thought,
well, we want to hear that part. That's the part. The pause is the part. Come on now.
Yeah, the pause is the part. Then I found out at 18 years old how much journalists make, and I was like, no, sir. Like, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. We can't live like this. Literally. And this was 100 years ago, and what journalism is and has become has morphed like completely. I just kind of fell into it, and found a sweet spot for me that I didn't know existed. I found a sweet spot in being able to tell a story and to kind of crystallize a strategy around storytelling, and to really be able to understand what PR is. PR is not such a different discipline than advertising. There, in the Venn diagram of marketing disciplines, there's a lot of overlap. There's a ton of overlap. How they're executed is what's different, right? And how you measure them is different, but there's a ton of overlap. And so, I can't give you a specific roadmap. I can just tell you that, and I'm sure Deidre can attest to this, like plenty of bumps and bruises along the way, like a ton of learnings along the way. And ultimately, it took me a long time to kind of find my voice and to decide that I didn't want to speak in someone else's voice. I just didn't. It just
Well,
wasn't.
This is Women's History Month. Were there any women mentors, sponsors along the way to help shape you into this?
I would say informally, like if I, informally, there are many, many women who I'm like, oh, yeah, I want to emulate how she walks into a room and how she exists because, candidly, as a little Black girl, 20 years ago, in some of these rooms, I kind of cowered because I felt like that's what I needed to do to survive. And I there are times when I find myself still feeling that the PTSD just doesn't go away, right? Even I don't care what your title is on some level. Or I'll speak from the eye and say, for me, it didn't matter what I was running or what I did. There were times that I still felt a twinge of that. So it's different now. But that was a journey. It was a journey to better understand. But I'll tell you, it doesn't go away. I'll tell you, at least for me, it doesn't go away. I'll give a quick little story. I'm currently, in the running for a large opportunity. And where we landed strategically was, even though the target audience that they identified was basically everybody and their mama, but that's a whole nother conversation about their research and segmentation, but I digress. The target audience was pretty broad. And we went in with you need to market to Black people. And when I tell you, I tossed and turned over that as a strategy going in with my big Black self, going in as the founder and principal of an agency and leading with that, I tossed and turned over it because I know that, and I've experienced this, is that they're going to challenge that because of who I am.
Yeah.
They're going to challenge the strategic thinking. They're going to challenge they're going to challenge how I got there. They're going to challenge how valid it is as an approach, as a strategy, because of my Black face. And the only reason, if a white person was presenting it, and I thought about that, I thought about stepping back and letting one of my colleagues, who's white, present the strategy. So that part doesn't, at least for me, hasn't completely gone away. Yeah. I will say it gets better, and there is a fair bit of liberation in having, and actually I get to make this decision. I get to say, I am going to give you the smartest strategy because it's the right one for you. And irrespective of what my face is, it's the right strategy for you. And no, I'm not going to turn my light down and have a white person present the strategy because that'll be more palatable to you.
Yeah, listen, that's called having receipts, right? Knowing your value, knowing your worth. And I love that. Thank you, Robin.
Of course.
Before, talk
we
to me.
We have 2 minutes. We don't have enough time.
We got it. Listen, we've got 5 minutes. We've got 5 minutes.
And we have 5. Robin, I love your story because I can just sort of go to church right here on like amen, 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 right. Amen. Because it doesn't ever, no matter how, oh my God, as you had mentioned earlier, when you said, you are still getting information about ad club acknowledgement on LinkedIn from all these people who have known you for a gazillion, million, trillion years. And you're right, people are coming out of the woodwork. They're like, oh my God, I remember when Deidre used to, she was the junior person on the team and she was dressing like she was the head of the account. I'm like, I know, what was wrong with me? Why was I acting like that? I just had this ambition that I just, this little Black girl from Brooklyn, born and raised in Brooklyn, family of 7, was just like, I am not a product of my environment. I know that I can go here. I know I can do this. I know that I can achieve. And so I just kept going. And, I have to say, I never had a mentor really. I didn't have until like spotty, but no one that that I'm still from when I was a vice president to now I'm a CMO. I don't have that sort of thing. I would say it wasn't until recently that I got a sponsor. Wow. And so that to me is very interesting, that my entire career, I never really had anyone particularly looking out for me. I fell forward. So I failed forward several times, because you can't fail. If you fell backwards, shame on you, right? I fell forward several times because, and I kept, after each fall, it was just like falling fail. I would say, okay, what do I need to do differently? Yeah. I learned to be more humble, because I was just like, okay, yeah, you walk into this essence of like, I need to know everything. I need to solve every problem. I can't ask any questions. I just have to hunker down and just do the work. And that's all in the fallacy of what it means to be Black in corporate America. Yeah. And because we do take on things that we believe make us stronger, and it actually makes us weaker, because while you're hunkering down doing the work, Sally is out having lunch because she's like, you know what, I want to hang out with this person. We're going to talk about whatever. And you're just like, I got to get this presentation done. I can't go. And they are just networking about that promotion that's going to happen. And we're just so astute. I mean, we're so focused. Yeah. So, I think I did a lot of that for a lot of my life. Like, I just have to hunker down. I just have to, as my husband would say, it's work smart, not hard. And I'm like, no, it's work hard. That's what they told us. And he's like, okay, no, it's work smart. My husband is white, he's like, no, that's not it. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's not it. All this time I thought that was it, Yeah. So I just think that we learn all these lessons, and I picked up all those lessons and I just kept going, and I kept, saying, why not me? Why can't I be the CMO? Culture is extremely important to every single brand. If they don't get it right, they don't get winning right. And we're about future-proofing brands. So I'm like, we're about future.
I love that. You don't get winning.
I love that too.
I love that. That's okay. I got to write that down.
So that's it, Ericka. We're out of time.
But you know what? Let me just say this. You said you didn't have any sponsors until recently, and I would argue that you did. I would argue that someone did see you. I saw you. And so I didn't have any power, but I'm sure if I saw you, other people saw you. And it's the same with you as well, Robin. A sponsor is having someone that sometimes we don't know. My father used to always tell me to, act as though, no one's watching, and do your best. And also, he used to always tell me, and be careful having a lot of people around you all the time, because the people who need to see you can't see you. And he meant that not to have friends.
Churching, yes.
Okay. My dad is a very wise man who had to navigate corporate America on his own. So I really stood up for he and my mom. But listen, ladies, we have come to the end. This is like talking in my living room. This was really happy hour for me, even with all of
you
our.
Have your drink?
It is Friday. It is empty. But I say this to say thank you all for spending time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Here comes the voice of God.
Uh-oh.
That's so funny. Thank you, Ericka, and thank you so much to our panelists. It's been a wonderful evening. I'd like to make an announcement for next week's show.
You put yourself on mute. Okay.
Our next MOBE Mondays episode will actually be a MOBE Tuesday on March 16th. As we continue our celebration of Women's History Month, we will salute women in music from the music museums around the country. Our speakers hail from the National Museum of African American Music, the Motown Museum, the Grammy Museum, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the upcoming Universal Hip Hop Museum. It is going to be a festive day. Please take a moment to join our mailing list on the link in the chat and get notified about all of our shows. We bid you adieu. And we say thank you again to our guest panelists, the Sleeping Beauty in the background, courtesy of Robin, along with our thanks to Deidre, Ericka, and Robin. Thank you to Facebook and YouTube for tuning in. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
This was fun.
And our link is in the chat for the after follow-up.